After Eraserhead, I wrote a script called Ronnie Rocket. I then set about to try to raise money for Ronnie Rocket, but I had zero luck. My friend, Stuart Kornfeld, was helping me, and even with his help, I had zero luck. And I thought, well, even though I want to make Ronnie Rocket, I think I better try to perhaps direct somebody else's script. So I asked Stuart if he knew of any other scripts that I might direct. I called him on the phone, and he said, "Why, David, yes, I do know. I know of 4 different things you could direct." And he said, "Come to Nibbler's, and we'll have lunch, and I'll tell you." So I went there, and before we even ordered, I said, "Stuart, now tell me." And he said, "Okay, David, the first script is a story entitled The Elephant Man." And a small bomb went off in my head. Instantly, I knew. I said, "That's it. That's what I want to do." I never heard the other 3 ideas.
I had met David Lynch independently because I had seen Eraserhead, which he had just finished, and he had done Eraserhead. And a friend of mine, Stuart Kornfeld, had introduced me to David because he'd seen the movie, and it had nothing to do with Elephant Man. It was just a situation where I said, I got to meet the guy who made this crazy movie. So he said, "Well, I'll give you his number." And he gives me David's number, and we called and we decided we'd have coffee together. We met for coffee, and we just talked. And there was something about him that I immediately gravitated towards because he's a very engaging, lovely man. And I asked him what he was doing, and he told me about a script that he was writing called Ronnie Rocket at the time. And he asked me what I was doing, and I said, "Well, I have this script called Elephant Man I'm trying to get made." He said, "Oh, Elephant Man, I like the sound of that." So he said, "Could I read it?" So I said, "Yeah, sure, why not?" So we exchanged scripts. And I sent him, or I gave him a copy of Elephant Man, and he gave me a copy of his script. Literally, the next day, he called me up and he said, "I love this story. Would you consider me directing it?"
That started us on a journey. Stuart, me, the 2 writers, and Jonathan Sanger, we went to 5 or 6 different studios to present this idea, and were turned down everywhere. No one wants to see a film about a monster like this. So Stuart was working, and Jonathan, they were both working with Mel Brooks. But I think Stuart gave the script to Anne Bancroft. She read it and really loved it, and she was the one that gave it to Mel to read. Mel loved it, and he said, "Okay, the 2 writers are in. Jonathan Sanger, you're in. Stuart, you're in. But who is this guy, David Lynch?"
It was one of those weird moments where I didn't have a director. I didn't have anybody obvious. I was obviously hoping to get some major Hollywood director at the time, and I was thinking of people like Alan Pakula or somebody like that. But I really didn't have anybody, and so I said, "Well, let's meet again." And we sat down and we talked about it, and he started telling me about how he saw the movie. And I liked what he said very much. I really, really thought he was really smart. He had great ideas. He had changes that he wanted. He thought he needed to collapse it. He wanted to work with the writers if he could meet them. And I agreed. So I said, "But look, I have a benefactor. It's Mel Brooks, and he's gonna have something to say about this. So I got to convince him that this is a good idea."
And they said, "Well, Mel, he is a filmmaker. He made a film called Eraserhead." And Mel said, "I've never heard of it. I need to see it." And when they told me Mel needed to see Eraserhead before I was going to be accepted or not, I said, "It's been nice knowing you guys."
So, okay, I called David up. We get a print of Eraserhead. Mel's office is at 20th Century Fox. We put it on in the screening room there one afternoon. I hadn't even thought about the consequences of this moment, but I'm sitting in a room alone. Mel Brooks is sitting behind me. I'm sitting in front of him, and the room goes black, light goes on, and we're watching Eraserhead. Now, I've already seen it. The second time you see Eraserhead, it's the longest movie in the history of movies. Yeah. I mean, I'm waiting for every moment to pass, and I'm thinking, the man behind me thinks I'm out of my mind.
I was waiting outside the theater, and as the story goes, the doors flew open after the film was over, and Mel ran toward me, embraced me, and said, "You're a madman. I love you. You're in."
When he came in, I looked beyond him. I thought that maybe this kid that came in was a messenger or something, because he wore a little leather jacket, and I'll never forget his shirt was always buttoned. He always wore kind of a white shirt. One of the first to do this insane thing. It was always buttoned here. It was kind of weird. No tie, just a shirt, buttoned. And he sat, and he had a lot of R's. He said, "It's a pleasure to meet you, sir." A lot of R's, like a Midwestern kid. Scared me. I expected to meet a young Max Reinhardt. I expected the guy to have, like Picasso, 2 eyes on one side of his nose. And here is a young Charles Lindbergh. He looked just like Charles Lindbergh. He says, "We just have to move things because I have to think about directing it. Not the screenplay, but the movie." Good talk. So I said, "You're hired."
What it was like working with Mel was sort of close to heaven. Mel, people see the humorous side of Mel and a certain kind of humor, and those people that know him see this super intelligence and depth of caring and intelligence. He's a very special human being. He was so supportive of me. I didn't have technically final cut on The Elephant Man. It was my first really, it wasn't a studio picture really. It was a Brooks Films picture. But Mel supported me from the beginning through some very tough times till the very end. And he gave me a break in life that was phenomenal. The original screenplay was written by Christopher DeVore and Eric Berggren. And it was taken from a chapter in a book called The Elephant Man and Other Reminiscences by a doctor named Frederick Treves. It was so important, their screenplay, that it did capture this fantastic soul, but it was rewritten with input from Mel, but it was rewritten with me and Chris and Eric. The film was, cast when I left Los Angeles for London. And I'd been to London once before. See, this was a kind of a strange thing. I was born in Missoula, Montana, and here I was going to shoot a Victorian drama in London with actors that were the world's greatest. And in a way, no one could really say how it came to be that I had the right to do this.
It was a tiring shoot, certainly. Oh yes, it was a demanding shoot, but it was hugely enjoyable. It was a great crew. And we've talked about Freddie Francis, talked about David. David just grew in confidence as the film went on too. He was he was in England. Nobody knew him. Nobody, who was this upstart and so on, young man, very young man, really, looking like a young Jimmy Stewart. And the people were very wary of him, you know, and quite dismissive of him to start with. I don't think they were by the end.
We needed to have a director of photography. And at that time, going over there, we didn't have one. And this person, because we were going to shoot in black and white, this person, you know, would be great if they, you know, shot black and white films before. And there were several names in the beginning. One of the people we were supposed to meet was Freddie Francis, who had shot Sons and Lovers, that I loved the look of that film. And I was looking forward to meeting Freddie. There were others that we were going to meet with. Freddie came in for a meeting, and he had been directing films, and now he was going to go back to being director of photography. And he hadn't shot a film for a long time. And this sort of went into the thinking a little bit. There were other people that had been working all along. It finally came down, though, to Freddie and one other cameraman. And it was a kind of a little bit of a struggle to you know, make the right choice. And Jonathan Sanger and I sat down one afternoon and decided we'd flip a coin. And whoever won would be the director of photography. And we said, tails, it's this person. Heads, it's this person. Heads, it's Freddie, say. And we flipped it, and it was tails. And we both looked at each other and said, no, it's got to be Freddie. So that's how Freddie became director of photography. And it was the perfect choice. One of the first things we did was shoot some black and white photos, and he had a dark room in his house. We went there, developed them, talked about a look, went, you know, around to different locations. And in those days, there were many locations in London that were from that time. Many. It was so beautiful. After The Elephant Man was finished, within the next year, 90% of those places were destroyed and new places were built. So it was pretty much the last possible time when we could get, you know, those authentic, fantastic locations.
Our personalities clicked. We got on very well together. I never devise anything, really. It's just that whatever scene is set before me, I photograph it with in mind how I and the director have decided to tell this story. David had this idea and suddenly produced these 5 or 6 elephants. We had no set or anything, so I said, well, just let them loose in the studio. There are no sets in the studio. And I just sort of backlit them from the rail so that we wouldn't see any of the studio. And I thought the thing worked out fantastically.
Sometimes the story just cries out for black and white, and white removes you one step from reality, and you can drift into another world so beautifully.
Mr. Merrick, I'd like you to meet my wife, Anne. Anne, this is John Merrick.
Well, Freddie, you know, he'd rather feel his way through something. Sensitivity is crucial. There's one scene where Tony Hopkins, Frederick Treves, is looking in a window in a big close-up, and you know, shooting through the glass, and the feel of that look was so beautiful. But then he turns, and instead of, you know, rack focusing as he walks away, it just went, you know, we just let it go softer and softer and softer. That shot's very beautiful. I was supposed to do the makeup for The Elephant Man, and during the summer of 1979, I worked in a garage in Wembley, going to work to try to, you know, do this. And I had what I thought were some, you know, great ideas, but they turned out to be not great. and so I failed in my attempt. And that, led to 4 very, very dark days when I thought I would be fired off the film. And I was having nightmares about this, and then when I'd wake up, so-called real life was so much worse that I wish I could go back into the nightmares. And Mel was going to come over, and I was sure he was going to let me go. But Mel came over, and during the time, before he came over, Jonathan Sanger, made a deal with Chris Tucker to do the makeup. And all Mel said was, David, you shouldn't have, even worried about that. You should just be thinking about directing. And thank God for Chris Tucker. So it turned out, again, Mel was golden.
David was rather anxious to show the full makeup of the Elephant Man rather earlier in the film than certainly I felt it should be. I thought the longer we can hold on without the full image being seen, the better. And being as the makeup was therefore, because we were so behind with it, and we were working on it while we were shooting as well, this was going on. So I mean, I'd be doing scenes with the disguise on, and then going straight down to Old Kent Road to work with Chris Tucker, and so on. So I mean, it was, and I have to say that I was persuading Chris, saying, don't get it ready too quickly, because there's another sequence coming up next week, which I would love to do with the disguise. Partly because the disguise was so incredibly successful, as you say, people remember it.
People like stories about these kind of things, but I think a lot of times people say too much about, but it's been said a lot of times. It was about 6 or 8 hours sometimes, for John Hurt to get into John Merrick. But John Hurt said, as the makeup was going on, a transformation occurred, and he just felt he just knew John Merrick.
Difficult to tell you exactly how one arrived at the physicality of it. I knew that it was based on a corkscrew, really, because that is how his spine was in his skeleton, which existed, which I'd seen. I don't know how on earth he managed to move at all. It's extraordinary. How one gets, there is a dignity to him. There has to be a dignity to him. That is what the story's about. There was absolutely no need to improvise anything. It was. I'm not against improvisation if it's going to get you somewhere. There's a very, very precise and beautifully written script, and I prefer it that way. I much prefer a writer to write it than me, even though arguably you know more about the character than anybody else. It doesn't mean to say that you're going to come up with the best lines. And the scenes were so exquisitely written, there was no need to improvise anything, I don't think. I mean, there was so much food for the imagination, and that's, after all, what any performance is based on, an imaginative leap.
I do know that an awful lot of the unit did not understand David or his methods. And I know at the end of the movie, or during the editing period, a lot of people were completely against the picture.
Terry Clegg, the production manager, came in, and as he was leaving, I said, "Oh, by the way, Terry, how'd you like the film?" And he turned to me and he said, "Well, quite frankly, David, I was very disappointed." And I couldn't believe it. And then they all wrote me a letter telling me all the things they thought was wrong with it.
So I'd seen it. I said, "David, forget it, it's wonderful." And gave David a few drinks and managed to persuade him not to touch the movie.
And I went back to Los Angeles, and about 2 months later, I get a call, I think it was in the middle of the night, from Terry Clegg, and the film had just opened in London, and he had seen it, and he said it was one of the most beautiful films he'd ever seen in his life, and he was sorry, about
that incident earlier. So it was a happy ending.
It's a film, certainly, that, as far as I know, that David set out to make, and it's certainly the film that I set out to make. I mean, everything in it is what I hoped to do. You know, of course, you could always feel you could do one scene a bit better or whatever, but you know, it's what was intended.
We didn't have any idea how it would go over. And I brought a print back with me for Mel, and he organized a screening right away for John Hurt, and I don't know who else was there, but it's over at 20th Century Fox. And I think that screening was, you know, everybody's... I didn't go to that screening, but from, you know, the reaction, I think that was the first indication that it might be something special.
We all felt that it was absolute film and that it was absolutely worth all the effort that was there. But we didn't know that it was going to have that sort of success. And I mean, it wasn't even helped by Paramount, with all due respect, to the company, because they didn't know how to sell it. They had no idea how to sell it. I mean, I can remember going to the first preview at Paramount, first public preview at Paramount in Los Angeles. And the studio boss said, when I went up to him, because it was an extraordinary show. I mean, people falling all over me and weeping and crying, and as only could happen in Los Angeles. And I went up and said to him, well, your fears should be allayed, because I knew he was having worries about how to sell it. And he said, well, John, it's always difficult to sell a monster movie. Which seemed to me an extraordinary thing to say, being as that's precisely what the film wasn't.
But then the reviews and the things that came from it, again, were, you know, just like blessings. And it was just suddenly, you know, very, very big. And I was in Paris doing promotion for the release of The Elephant Man in Paris, in France, when I was having these pommes frites, these French fries, that were the best French fries, and doing interviews. And I kept asking for more of these French fries. And the phone rings, and it's my wife saying that, you know, this film just got 8 Academy Award nominations. We didn't win one, but we got 8.
What I know now is I certainly didn't know then that if you're going to get Oscars, then you have to have big campaigns, which seems to me to be repulsive, really. It shouldn't have to have campaigns, and you shouldn't have to go campaigning to people to vote for you. I mean, it's ridiculous somehow, you know. But I spent most of the time on the Oscar night, because we got 8 nominations and no Oscars. And I said, look, if we'd got 1 Oscar, it would have destroyed the uniformity. We can't have that. No, it's good. 8 Oscars, no Oscars. I mean, 8 nominations, no Oscars. Fine. And everybody lightened up and laughed for a little bit, but then 5 minutes later, they were very serious about Oscars in America. I kept the head, the cranium, and I didn't know where to put it. And I had a very small house in Hampstead at the time. And I put it up at the top of a wardrobe and left it there. And then I was getting a house in Oxfordshire, and I wasn't staying in the house in Hampstead very much. And I had a girlfriend looking after it. I mean, a friend, not a girlfriend, a friend looking after it. And I got a call saying, there's been a burglary. And I said, oh, God. Yes, I had a feeling that might happen. She said, don't worry, though. She said, nothing's been taken at all. They opened the wardrobe door, and the Elephant Man cranium fell out. And he obviously scarpered. He just ran for it, because probably in the dark. he didn't know quite what had fallen out of the wardrobe, and it certainly looked grotesque enough to give him frighten the knickers off him. So he disappeared, taking nothing at all, having knocked the back door down. So yes, I did keep something, and it protected me.